like image loading and maybe even vendor caching. But right now, in the kind of place in the web, this is the most impactful thing that you can do, you know, not to be too hand wavy. So yes, thank you. Okay. I should sit down now so I can answer questions. Okay.
Many shooters, so
Nice! Initial questions is good.
I'm just on the front row.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Talking about code splitting,
Mhm.
of course. We're seeing some project that I was working on. We're using Webpack chunk name.
Yes.
The thing over there that you put inside.
Magic comment. I'll pull it
magic
up.
comment.
Yep.
So how does that magic comment mess up my code splitting if I'm like maybe loading like one type of component in different places, and well, one type of component that has like 5 different components, I'm just using one. Does that mean that I'm loading like that chunk like with all of that just for that specific component that I'm loading the first time, or?
Okay, so I'll repeat the question so the people on the live stream can hear. So I'm just going to summarize it, and then you can be like, Sean, that's not even what I said. You want to basically, you're asking what are the implications of using Webpack chunk name API or like the magic comments when you're code splitting? Does it have an effect on it?
On code coverage, actually. That's
And code coverage as well. So, okay. The Webpack chunk name feature, really all it is kind of a developer experience feature that just gives it a name for a lazy loaded bundle. However, there is a scenario where if you give a bunch of bundles the same Webpack chunk name, which is not recommended for code splitting, then it merges them into a single chunk. So number one, don't do it.
okay.
So don't name multiple lazy loaded bundles the same name, right? Because then it merges them together. Ideally, you want them separate. And then 2, use the Webpack chunk name magic comment. So the feature here, it gives me a good segue, right? Because I can kind of talk about it briefly in my workshop. I kind of go way in depth on all the magic comments. But you can go to webpack.js.org, and like my favorite part is that this is searchable, right? Like, okay, magic comments. You go to our docs page, boom. Okay, so I get excited about how cool that is. Because it like find things in the doc and it's useful. Not everybody has those experience with docs. So Webpack chunk name, basically it's an inline comment that you can allow your bundle to be named. There's a long-winded history to why it is the way it is. You could probably find it in a GitHub issue. Long story short, in Webpack 5, we're going to minimize the need for this because we're going to have named bundles in your development mode by default. So this should be an easier experience, and you may not even need to use it anymore. But for those who, let's say, like a good example, the Microsoft Outlook so what do we call it? Outlook Web App, OWA, is one of the largest single-page applications. They generate 400 lazy loaded bundles, right? And we're talking across 20,000 modules. Probably one of our most premier React applications that really focuses on performance. And so they use this significantly because they want to understand how to debug. By default, Webpack just gives numbers to these bundles instead of names. And so this is a nice developer experience feature that you can leverage yourself. So answer your question, hopefully?
Yes.
Awesome.
So in the React example,
Yep.
you showed fallback spinner,
Yes.
but not in the view example. I wonder if
Yes. Well, actually, so I leave it out because I don't know. Well, yes. So Vue does support it. So instead, so there's kind of like a shorthand, and then there's a more a heavier API that lets you have all these features. So I'll show you if you go to the Vue.js.org website and you search Vue async component factory or async component. Let's see. Okay, actually, here it is. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Docs team. They're so good. Okay, as of Vue, what is it, 2.3? Evan also saw this feature show up prior to when React Loadable and a bunch of other libraries started adding these features. So this is possible in the same way. So instead of assigning it to just a function that returns a dynamic import, you can have it be equal to a function that returns a object in this case, and then has a component property which takes a dynamic import, and then you can also pass a loading component, an error component, even a delay for like if it loads faster than 200 seconds, don't show the loader, right? Or if it takes, and time it out after 3 seconds, right? Like, so it's really rich and configurable. So like, that's all possible. We found in Mutual, like we didn't need to use this as much. Maybe there are just a few cases and scenarios, but yes, it is there and it is available if you need to use it. Any other questions? Oh yeah, I owe you a question. I owe you a question. Unless I answered it?
No,
Okay, okay. You're next.
How does code splitting work with vendor spaces? So imagine you have a chunk and uses some things.
Yep. So vendor splitting is what I was talking about. Like, so I cringe at our docs because we have we have code splitting, and then we say vendor splitting and bundle splitting. The only code splitting that creates asynchronous bundles is code splitting. Anything else is like a cacheability feature. So like what you refer to as vendor splitting is like using the Commons chunk plugin or split chunks. And 98% of the time, I endorse people to not touch it. So like, don't mess with it whatsoever. First, fix unused code. And then if it's like, well, we could do more by removing duplicate code across like, let's say, multiple entry points, go ahead and use the feature. But 90% of the time, we found it does more harm. Like, that's why we removed it from a common plugin to like this kind of embedded API in Webpack 4, because we saw people kept using it, but creating these giant vendor bundles unknowingly what the consequences would be. So not to say like, don't use it. We do a lot of this stuff by default. And you can find it in our documentation under split chunks, I believe. So I think maybe it's the split chunks plugin. Do we talk about it? Yeah, so like, disclaimer, none of you use this until you until you implement code splitting first. Promise. I promise please listen to me. I don't even like showing it, but it's okay. So there's this plugin, and it's an API that helps you handle like multi-page app architectures. But like I have found in 90% of the cases that just code splitting and not even worrying about this and letting Webpack do the defaults is more performant, like in most cases. But we do have some scenarios where we handle, like split chunks is turned on for lazy loading, like for asynchronous bundles, but like it's only like really, there's very specific scenarios where I've really found it useful, and in most of them, it's not. So I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but I'd say focus on code splitting first.
Actually, it's just a silly detail question when you did the example with the click.
Yes.
And you just took out one, let's say, one module.
Mm-hmm.
When you showed the network, it loaded 2 bundles.
So that's actually the advanced code splitting feature that Webpack does behind the scenes that does vendor caching. So it's a vendor caching feature for lazy loaded bundles. But you're absolutely right. The only reason why is because I'm also importing Lodash, a Lodash library. And so we have this special algorithm. If I didn't use unique from Lodash, it would just create one bundle.
Nice.
But you can actually read about, let me see, optimization split chunks. So it actually kind of showcases, we have like a reading guide that talks about this. Where is it? Yeah. So here's the examples. So the default is only for lazy loaded bundles, and we just basically say, does the lazy loaded bundle contain modules from no module? Is like that no module bigger than 30K? Are the number of parallel requests, greater than a certain amount? And it doesn't affect the initial, request, right? So like then we choose to create a async vendor bundle. But that's okay, right? Because it doesn't affect the initial load time. So we kind of have this freedom to do that, knowing that it's a good practice, right? But don't touch it by default. I'm sorry, I don't mean to gatekeep this feature, but I just see in 90% of the time, it does more harm than good. So, but great observation actually, because like I was nervous. I was like, oh, they're probably gonna say something about 2 bundles, but it's true. If I didn't use unique Lodash, like I can do it if you don't believe me, but yeah. So yes. Any other questions? There are still a bunch of hands, I think.
Also, please remember we have questions coming from our.
Oh yeah.
who are
Here,
watching
you can drive this. I'm sorry.
We have Luis Lazauce who shares this question. Could Webpack also help them that initially require JavaScript inside the HTML to optimize the initial page load. For instance, to pre-render entry pages with sources embedded. As an example, small images as base64 or also JS code for CSS.
Okay, so is that's not specific to lazy loading? It doesn't sound like.
I would say
Right. So what was his name again?
Julius
Or Julius?
Julius.
Oh, okay.
Julius.
Whoever you are, person. I'm not gonna butcher names. Human, person, developer. There are, yes, more techniques that you can take advantage of for optimizing your web application. You're absolutely right that there are many others. What I have found in my experience and in a lot of real-world applications is that this is probably the most high impact and return on investment performance feature that you can implement in your application today. And almost, actually, like I have statistics that say, like, out of all top 1,000 Alexa or 10,000 Alexa websites, the average amount of unused code is like 55%. So, like, we could make the web like that much faster. So I always, yeah. So there's lots of other techniques, but this one's just specific to like the issue with unused code and you know, kind of shows why code splitting is even an important feature today.
So we have another question over there, and then another question from
Okay.
our audience online. Who raised their hand? Yeah.
Code splitting with Redux. I have to do it before, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
I just want to get a thought. Like, if I'm using a DOCS pattern, right, and there are certain releases that, okay.
No, it's actually great. Like, it's a great question.
If I'm actually using the DOCS pattern, there should be an easier way than what I have to do. So,
I agree with you.
um,
So the question is like, what is the suggested advice for code splitting when you're using central state, like a central state management library? Because it's not just Redux. MobX has the same issue. Flux has the same issue. Okay, so one of the caveats is that you basically have central state that's like, you try and have to have statically available for all of your code, right? So like, that's one caveat, right? I can tell you what newer frameworks do today, and I think that Mark, I'm forgetting his last name, he's the maintainer of Redux, but I believe there might be documentation or there might be features in the works on how they're going to try and accomplish this, because it is a prolific issue. So the answer, at least I can tell you, so I'll show you how one framework does it, and I think that it should be possible, or it may be possible today, but I just don't know how to do it myself with Redux. So in Vue, we have a very similar library called Vuex. Vuex async, Vue register module. Yeah, okay. So Vuex has this way of taking and dynamically, or to lazy load pieces of your store, right? So this would be the applicable case, right? So essentially, anywhere that we have a method called register module, I say we, but I'm not even on the team. I'm on the fan team. Anyways, so part of the API lets you register like this conventional module system, but the important piece is that this also takes a function that returns a promise, right? So what you can do is, if you have a store with actions getters, setters, or like whatever they call dispatchers in Redux, this allows you to code split an entire chunk of all those things that you don't need until you get to that page. So it's like, if you're in an application, let's say, okay, a good example is like, you're going to have a part of your store that's like only relevant to like one route, right?
that's exactly what
Right, so essentially what this allows you to do in Vuex is that you can take and separate, you know, you might put it in a separate module, and then you would call this API that you would use code splitting on, and it just works with the state management system. So what it requires is that it might be a little bit of glue code in Redux. The best person to follow, I should just look him up on Twitter because he'll tell me. Like, or he's a great follow, and you can ask him. He tweets just like I do all the time. Mark, please show it up. Mark Erickson. I'm sorry for not knowing your last name, Mark, if you're watching this. I always forget it. Okay, so he's the Redux maintainer. Literally tweet at him and ask him about this. Or, screw it. Hold on. Well, I'm just going to ask him, right? Mark, can you code split a piece of a store today in Redux? If so, how? And then, well, no, because this doesn't even show, like their docs in Vuex don't even show how you use the API.
You know, the challenge with Redux, it's not only the enhancers that you're using afterwards. So if you're using Redux Saga, you'll have to do it in a way that's
Exactly.
from the way that you are doing it if you're using Redux Stan, right? Like,
Yep.
because on one end you have to use the replace reducer of the store, but then the rest of the enhancers you also need to
Yep.
happen with. But yeah,
That's one of the
but
challenges.
really, like no one generic solution. It really depends on the way that you're using it.
Right, and it depends on if the library wants to support that kind of functionality, right? Like if they want to support code splitting, they might have a API that says you can register a whole piece of your store dynamically by calling this method, and it takes a promise, right? And that means you could use the dynamic import to then fetch it lazily. So like a good place to start is ask the maintainers, submit a PR if you want to implement it yourself. There's good working examples with Vuex that exist today that you can even base it off of. At Microsoft, we have a specific library called Satchel.js, which is a mixture of like MobX and something else. It's built on top of MobX with TypeScript and stuff. And I believe we have support for it where you can like separate actions and reducers or whatever they're called in Redux or MobX land. But we're doing the same thing. But it might require you to like maybe wrap Redux and add something yourself. But it could be the next most popular state management library. You never know.
So we got more questions coming from our live audience.
Oh.
This one seems to be unrelated to dynamic imports, but also quite relevant.
Okay, cool.
What's your take about PK-Web?
Pika Web. I think Pika, so for all the Pika Web, right? The specific Pika Web, okay, the tool. So like I'll pull it up and I'll try to do it, well, I'll give you my hot take on it. I think Pika package. So Pika package comes from, where can we get it to show up? Pika, PKG? I can't type, this is the worst. There we go. Oh no, I even pull up the blog. It's okay, it's okay. Hey, let's give them a chance, okay? Maybe not a good strategy to go after the most popular tool to sell your own tool, but anyways. So Pika, what's really cool is that it started as a project to be able to identify how you can find like really bundleable libraries, right? So like if I search 3JS, what's super cool, or no, I think it's just called 3. It shows you all these things, right? Like, so there's a bunch of other performance features related to Webpack and how you write your library. So like, do you have this field called side effects false? Is it a TypeScript library? I don't know, does it have 0 dependencies? Is it hot right now? This is kind of guardrails for you to maybe like not have to like scour the web so much, right? Maybe you can rely on one of these libraries. Like you can know, right? Like, hey, this is gonna like, if I'm using TypeScript, I'm gonna care, right? Because I want typings, right? Or I want to know, like for me, since I'm a biased Webpack maintainer, I want to know if the project cares about Webpack as a consumer for their library. So they use this feature called side effects false, and you can ask me another time about that because that's a whole another 30-minute talk. You know, or maybe I don't want the next left pad to happen, so 0 dependencies, that's good. So like, you know, that's what's really cool about this Pika package. So it looked like he was inspired to work on something else, and it turns out that was a future without Webpack. So let's pull it up. So basically the idea is that you are able to import these dependencies, isn't it, from their, let's see, how does it work again? You do like npx Pika Web, and then what it does is the point is like it lets you use native modules in the native module land, like ES modules in the browser. However, instead of bundling it as a build step, they like, you have this like web server that spins up and it bundles it at install time and like it serves it to you. So like, in my opinion, it just puts the bundling step in a hidden location that you don't mess with. But then what does that mean? You have less flexibility, you have less extensibility, you have less like, I don't know, if something goes wrong, how do you fix it, right? Do you even know how to fix it? Is there a rich ecosystem? But mind you, it's a new project, so we should give it a chance. I encourage you all to try it, right? So at the least, it allows us to stay competitive, but it also gives them more inspiration on things to try. So like, you know, but you know, maybe a word of advice to any like new tool. Trying to attack the most popular tool will just look like somebody trying to sell a new framework. But you guys all love React. Why would you switch? Right? So maybe not the best strategy. So if you're going to do this, maybe don't. But anyways, yeah, that's my take on Pika. So yeah.
Any more questions around? Otherwise, I'm going to shoot one. So.
You have a question?
Of course.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Let it rip.
So, for instance, dynamic imports are currently in stage 3 of the
Yes.
39 proposal.
Yes.
And we currently can actually leverage this
Because of that?
feature by replacing, for instance, Dado with ES7 preset or setting the TypeScript compiler to target ES next. But I'm curious about how does Webpack operate dynamic imports under the hood? Do you build
Yeah. So here's the
API?
good thing. Yeah, you never uses them in production. So the benefit is that like as long as you tell TypeScript, I know that might be still a challenge for you, right? You can use module ESNext, but like you can still transpile to ES5 because it's module syntax versus like language syntax, right? So if you still use ESNext as your module property on TypeScript, yeah, or target, yeah, it'll just output. It'll allow the dynamic import to not be down compiled, right? Which then Webpack consumes and just replaces it with glue code that returns a promise, right? And then our Webpack runtime, which performs the lazy loading. So like ideally, you can still have the syntax that you need to support. The bigger challenge is that the dynamic import, like as long as you can use the target ESNext, then you're all set. But I don't know if that solves your problem.
Yep, kind of solves the problem for us. And for instance, what happens when you're just using plain vanilla JavaScript and you want to use the Bagel ES7 preset? Is exactly the same flow as in Webpack, or
Yes.
is Webpack polyfilling this?
So, well, it depends. So we do have like a special comment that like turns it off, right? I mean, ideally in a world with Webpack, if you're using the dynamic import and you're not trying to do anything purely dynamic, like you want Webpack to bundle it into like, you know, to give you a static file so that you can cache it up front and have that benefit. However, there are situations where that's not always what you want to do. So I believe that there is a API method, and I'm just going to look it up, I'm sorry, because I don't use it enough myself. But I think if dynamic import, no, I think is it in Magic Commons? Thank you very much. So I think if you set it to, there is a special one that like turns it off. Webpack ignore true. Now, do I really encourage this? No. I have found personally in my experience that there's very, 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 very few reasons that you truly need to dynamically import something. So I would ask you to like really double check and make sure like why would I need to truly dynamically import something? But otherwise, yeah, you can still, like if you want to just use the syntax standalone, Babel won't touch this with preset EMV. The only step that you need to add is that you have the Babel preset dynamic import syntax, or syntax dynamic import, or plugin, sorry. So if you want to support it, I think this is all you need. It might even be support. I think it's supported in preset EMV by default because it.
ES7 comes out of the box.
Yes, yes. So and if you're using Babel Loader will handle the right module output for you now by default if you're using Babel Loader 8 and Babel 7. So that should be handled for you out of the box. Thanks to that team, Henry Zhu is a godsend, and all the other maintainers.
All questions? Come on, guys. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. You can rip me apart. Sean, how could you say that? No, it's okay. Yes.
Well, sometimes we're using Webpack Bundle Analyzer
Mhm.
to actually check out what's been bundled in
Yes.
different chunks.
Yep.
But because it's just like a tree of like boxes, it's really hard to actually check out why one chunk is being bundled in one part, or one module is being bundled in one chunk. So is there any other recommendations about how to?
There isn't a beautiful way yet. There are some teams who are trying to work on this, like us at Microsoft are working on our own like plugin. Obviously, once we get it to work, we'll open source it, right? Like we do with everything else. So like we're working on something. Is like you're right. I usually use when anybody asks about why should you use Webpack Bundle Analyzer, I say use it to be able to spot like visual anomalies, right? Like so I care about performance, but in my application I see low-regular. I'm like, I know better. I know I should be using low-es. So where the hell did this come from, right? So you know, you're right. You do have to kind of like search across all your modules, or the easiest thing that you could do is that there is a script. Well, it's not that easy, so I feel I shouldn't even say easy. I'm sorry. It's tedious because you can actually add a flag that says like show modules reasons in Webpack. I just like using the verbose flag because at this point, like you're already showing a bunch of information. So like I think, so verbose. You can just append it to your script if you're just like running Webpack. In this case, I had some other scripts I append it to. So I'm going to show you the feedback and what it looks like. Okay, so it might take a second because that's a lot of output. But or maybe it doesn't. So like a lot of times you can actually see like what requires what. So maybe it doesn't. But there's a flag called module reasons. And so let's see, display reasons that you can show that will actually show you like why reasons. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Display the reasons about module inclusion in the output, right? So like it'll show you this long graph that you can kind of trace. It's not the best. It could be the next best Webpack plugin if you implement it. Right? Contribute to our rich ecosystem. Would love that. Or you could add it to Bundle Analyzer, right? That would be a cool feature. I'm sure it's even in their GitHub issues. So there also is like other command flags for like showing tree shaking and like, you know, all sorts of stuff. I usually use verbose, but it turns out display reasons isn't included because it's already getting pretty long and lengthy when you're using those arguments. So, any other questions?
Is there any case you would recommend rollup instead of Webpack?
So yeah, rollup is really useful for like, okay, so that's a great question. So now in Webpack 4, you don't even need to like bundle a library. You shouldn't, right? Because Webpack by default can tree shake loose modules. Let's just say there might be customers who are using Webpack 3 or 2, like you can't control that, right? Or using another bundler, or wants to ship a single ES module. So like those are all perfect cases to use rollup. My advice is that if you're a library author and you want Webpack to consume the most performant format, that means shipping the raw source. Always ship the raw source. That's my advice. It does mean that you're offloading transpilation complexity to the consumer, but like if it's like your own company and everybody uses Webpack anyways, then it's like, okay. So the point being is that a great example is for who uses async await. Okay, like you love it, right? Did you know that it transpiles to like 30 lines of ES5 JavaScript? So the point here is that you probably don't want to pre-transpile that in your library. Instead, just ship the raw async await and let your consumer decide whether they need to support the browsers that need to have it down compiled. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. I would say those are great like places for rollup, but otherwise, like I tell the Vue ecosystem and the React ecosystem the same thing: ship the raw components and then let the user import them. Yep. Yes.
What I'm trying to get at is that it's the bar size of the library transparent to ES5, whatever, will be this. Then when it's being handled by Webpack, then it becomes something actually a lot smaller. You know what I mean?
Potentially, yes. Absolutely.
What would be like a good measure to like a good way to measure the size of your library? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, in your tests, have a fixture that runs Webpack, like the latest version of Webpack, and import one component, and you can report on the bundle size. I think like that's probably the best way, right? Like you could build that into like a test suite or like reporting in your CI that just like outputs a plain text doc, and like you can update that in your documentation. outputs like a README diff or something. Like you have a you could be really creative with it, right? But like long story short, in your as you're testing, or if you're wanting to like test the performance, you want to have a real live scenario, which is a consumer using Webpack and loading it, the raw source by default. Yep.
We're going to host an after-talk meetup here as well with some pizzas that are coming and drinks. So actually, I think that we can continue in a more casual,
Wrap it up.
friendly way.
Wrap it up, Sean.
With beer in hand, some slices of pizza. Are you guys up to it?
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming and listening. I appreciate it. Try Microsoft Edge. Please.